Today on Art Alive, we are going to look at youth and creativity. In the studio, we have Dr. Kay Austin from Sussex University, who has just written a book on the subject.
Good morning.
Dr. Austin, is it true that there's a link between youth and creativity?
Yes, there is. Most great artists begin creating when they are very young. Obviously, there are important differences between art forms. A lot of musicians and poets produce their best works when very young, and this often happens a bit later for painters, sculptors, film directors and novelists.
And a lot of artists die young too.
Yes, that's true. The most famous examples of this are those of the Romantic period. For example, 3 of the great English Romantic poets, Keats, Shelley and Byron, all died in their 20s or mid-30s.
Why are young people often so creative?
Well, they are more open to change, to doing things differently. The Romantic poets are a good example of this. They rejected classical literature and wanted to write poetry that was more personal, full of feeling and emotion.
And they had interesting personal lives too.
Yes, they were against the conventions of the older generations. For example, the poet Byron had a life full of love affairs and adventure. One of his ex-lovers called him mad, bad and dangerous to know. Of course, the Romantics weren't only poets. A good example is the novelist Mary Shelley. She wrote Frankenstein when she was only 20. She was staying with some friends in Switzerland. It was a very wet summer, and so they told each other stories to pass the time. That's when Mary Shelley came up with the idea for her novel and wrote Frankenstein.
And what about musicians?
Well, everyone knows about Mozart, but my favourite composer is Frédéric Chopin. He's another Romantic, of course. Chopin started composing in his teens and produced some of his best work in his 20s.
And, of course, he died young too.
Yes, in his 30s. But, of course, there are a lot of great artists who produce some of their best work when they are young but go on and live a long time, like Pablo Picasso. He lived a long life but produced some of his most famous work in his 20s. For example, his painting in 1907 called Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, it was a painting that changed modern art, and he painted it when he was only 26.
Is that still happening? Are young artists still producing great work?
Well, it's too early to tell what work is going to last, what work is going to be seen as great. But in the 90s, there was a group of artists in Britain called the Young British Artists. And they were very successful with young artists like Damien Hirst and Tracey Emin.
Tracey Emin is the one with the bed.
Yes, she presented her own untidy bed as art. A lot of people were shocked and hated it. Other people thought it was something different, something new and interesting.
Well, that's another subject, isn't it? OK, thank you, Dr. Austin. Dr. Austin's book is published by...